The storm hit without warning. One moment, Jake was riding through the canyon. The next, the sky cracked open like an angry beast. Rain poured down in sheets so thick he couldn't see 3 feet ahead. Thunder rolled across the mountains, shaking the earth beneath his horse's hooves. His mare, Bella, stumbled on the slick rocks. Jake felt the saddle slip, felt himself falling before he could react. He hit the ground hard, his shoulder slamming against stone. Pain exploded through his body. The world spun. Bella whinnied in panic and bolted into the darkness. Jake tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. His shoulder screamed with every movement. A painful bruise was forming on his temple where his head had struck rock. The rain hammered against his face, filling his eyes, his mouth. He was going to die out here, alone, in a storm, and nobody would ever know what happened to him. Through the sheets of rain, he saw something. A light. Faint, flickering, but definitely there. A cabin, maybe 200 yards away. Jake gritted his teeth and began to crawl. Every inch was agony. His shoulder felt like it was filled with broken glass. But that light meant shelter, warmth, survival. It took him 20 minutes to reach the door. 20 minutes of dragging himself through mud and rain and pain. When he finally reached the wooden steps, he used his good arm to pull himself up. His fingers found the door handle. He pushed. The door swung open. Jake collapsed inside, landing face first on a woven rug. The warmth of the cabin wrapped around him like a blanket. He heard footsteps. Quick, light footsteps. Then the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. "Don't move!" The voice was female. Strong, unwavering. Jake tried to lift his head, but the room was spinning too fast. "Please," he managed to say. "I don't mean any harm. The storm." "I said don't move." He didn't move. He couldn't move. The last thing Jake saw before darkness claimed him was a pair of leather moccasins stepping into his field of vision. Then nothing. Itza stood over the unconscious stranger, her rifle still aimed at his chest. Rain blew through the open door, scattering droplets across her floor. She kicked the door shut with her heel without taking her eyes off the man. He was a cowboy. That much was obvious from his boots, his hat that had fallen beside him, his dust-covered clothes now soaked with rain, and something darker. She looked closer. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe, and please write in the comments where you're watching from. It truly makes us happy to know. Itza knelt beside him, keeping the rifle within reach. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. A dark bruise ran along his temple, and his shoulder sat at an angle that wasn't natural. Dislocated, probably. She should drag him back outside. That's what her grandmother would have told her. White men brought nothing but trouble. They had taken everything from her people. Their land, their freedom, their dignity. But then she looked at his face. Really looked. Her heart stopped. She knew this face. 3 days ago, she had gone to town to trade herbs for supplies. It was always a risk. Most people in Dusty Creek tolerated her because she was the only healer within 50 miles. But tolerance wasn't the same as acceptance.
That day, 3 rough cowboys had cornered her outside the general store.
They'd called her names she'd heard 1,000 times before. Apache witch. Savage. They'd knocked her basket from her hands, scattered her carefully gathered herbs in the dirt.
She had prepared herself for worse. It always got worse. But then this man had appeared. Tall, broad-shouldered. His voice had cut through the laughter like a whip. "Leave her alone!" The rough men had turned, ready to fight. But something in the stranger's eyes made them hesitate. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't backing down. He stood there, one hand resting casually on his hip, near his holster, waiting. The men had retreated, muttering curses, but unwilling to test him. The stranger had helped her gather her herbs. He hadn't said much, just handed her the basket and tipped his hat. "Ma'am, That was all. Then he'd walked away, disappearing into the crowded street. Aitza had thought about him every day since. Now here he was, injured on her floor, delivered to her door by the storm. She set down the rifle. "You saved my honor," she whispered, brushing wet hair from his forehead. "Now I'll save your life." She worked quickly. She'd been healing people since she was old enough to walk. Her mother had taught her, and her grandmother before that. The old ways, the plant ways. She cleaned his wound with boiled water and yarrow. She ground willow bark for the pain he would feel when he woke. His shoulder was harder. She had to brace her foot against his chest and pull with all her strength. The joint popped back into place with a sound that made her wince. He groaned but didn't wake.
Good. Better that he slept through the worst of it.
By the time she finished wrapping his shoulder and bandaging his head, the storm had begun to quiet. Aitza sat back on her heels, exhausted. The stranger lay on her rug, breathing steadily now, color slowly returning to his cheeks. She didn't know his name, didn't know where he came from or where he was going, didn't know if he was a good man or a bad one. But she knew one thing. He had stood up for her when no one else would, and Aitza always repaid her debts. She pulled a blanket over him and settled into her chair by the fire, rifle across her lap. Whatever happened next, she would face it in the morning. Outside, the storm finally passed, leaving nothing but silence and stars. Jake woke to the smell of herbs and wood smoke. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. The ceiling above him was made of wooden beams, carefully fitted together. Animal skins hung on the walls. A fire crackled somewhere nearby, casting dancing shadows across the room. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through his shoulder like lightning. He gasped and fell back against something soft. A pillow. Someone had placed a pillow under his head. "Don't move. You'll tear the bandages." Jake turned his head toward the voice. A woman sat in a wooden chair by the fire, watching him with dark, careful eyes. She was Apache. Her long black hair was braided down her back, and she wore a simple dress made of soft leather. In her lap lay a rifle, her fingers resting casually on the stock. Memory came flooding back. The storm, the fall, crawling through the mud, collapsing through a stranger's door. "Where am I?" His voice came out rough, barely more than a whisper. "My home." The woman didn't move from her chair. "You entered without invitation." "I'm sorry, the storm. I couldn't see anything. I just needed shelter." "You found it." Jake tried to move his shoulder again, testing it. The pain was still there, but duller now. He looked down and saw that someone had removed his shirt. White bandages wrapped around his shoulder and chest. His head throbbed, and when he touched his temple, he felt more bandages there. "You did this?" The woman nodded. "Thank you." He meant it. Without her help, he would have died out on that canyon floor, or frozen in the storm. "I owe you my life." "Yes, you do." Something in her voice made him look at her more carefully. She was studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, like she was searching for something in his face. "Do I know you?" he asked. The woman was quiet for a long moment. Then she rose from her chair, set the rifle against the wall, and walked toward him. She knelt beside him, close enough that he could see the firelight reflected in her eyes. 3 days ago, Dusty Creek, outside the general store. Jake frowned, searching his memory. 3 days ago, he had passed through Dusty Creek. He'd bought supplies, watered his horse. What else had happened? Then he remembered. The 3 men. The woman they had cornered. The herbs scattered in the dirt. He remembered the fear in her eyes, carefully hidden behind a mask of dignity. He remembered stepping forward without thinking, without planning, driven by something deep in his chest that couldn't stand to watch cruelty unfold. "That was you," he said softly. That was me. Jake studied her face now, seeing past the firelight and shadows. Yes, he recognized her. The same proud jaw, the same dark eyes that revealed nothing and everything at once. I'm glad you're all right, he said. Those men were cowards. Most men are. She paused. But not you. You stood alone against 3. Why? It was a simple question, but Jake found he didn't have a simple answer. He thought about it, staring at the ceiling beams while the fire crackled and popped. My mother raised me to believe that a man's worth isn't measured by how he treats his friends, he finally said. It's measured by how he treats people who can't fight back. Strangers. People with less power. People everyone else has forgotten. The woman was silent. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. Was. She passed. 5 years ago. Fever took her.
I'm sorry.
Jake shook his head slightly, wincing at the movement. She lived a good life, taught me everything I know. I just tried to make her proud. The woman rose and walked to a small table where various jars and bowls were arranged. She began mixing something, her hands moving with practiced ease. I am called Aitza, she said without turning around. It means moonlight. Jake Thornton. Jake. She tested the name on her tongue. You are far from home, Jake Thornton. I don't have a home, not anymore. She turned to look at him. Everyone has a home, even if it's just a place in their memory. Jake thought about that. He thought about the ranch where he'd grown up, sold after his mother died to pay debts he didn't know existed. He thought about the years since then, drifting from town to town, working cattle drives and odd jobs, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Maybe you're right, he admitted, but my home exists only in the past now. Aitza returned to his side with a small cup filled with dark liquid. Drink this. It will help with the pain and help you sleep. Jake eyed the cup suspiciously. Aitza's lips curved into what might have been a smile. If I wanted you gone, I would have left you in the rain. Drink. Fair point. Jake took the cup and drank. The liquid was bitter and earthy, but warmth spread through his body almost immediately. His shoulder stopped throbbing. His head felt lighter. How long until I can travel? He asked, already feeling drowsy. Your shoulder needs at least a week to heal properly, maybe more. A week? Jake tried to protest, but his eyelids were growing heavy. I can't stay here a week. I have to keep moving. Running from something? Running towards something. There's a difference. Is there? Jake wanted to answer, but sleep was pulling him down like a gentle current. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Aitza's face, watching him with those unreadable eyes. When Jake woke again, sunlight streamed through the small window. His shoulder still ached, but the sharp edge of pain had dulled to something manageable. He turned his head and found Aitza sitting by the fire, grinding herbs with a stone mortar. How long was I asleep? Through the night and half the day. The medicine is strong. Jake's stomach growled loudly. Aitza glanced at him, and this time there was definite amusement in her eyes. There is food on the table. Can you sit? With effort, Jake pushed himself upright. The room spun briefly, then settled. He swung his legs over the edge of the sleeping mat and took a moment to steady himself before attempting to stand. Slowly, Aitza warned. He made it to the table without falling, which felt like a victory. A wooden bowl sat there filled with some kind of stew. Vegetables and herbs, nothing he recognized, but the smell made his mouth water. Thank you, he said, for everything. Aitza continued grinding her herbs. Eat. You need strength. Jake ate. The stew was delicious, flavored with things he couldn't name. As he ate, he studied the cabin. It was small but well maintained. Every item had its place. Dried herbs hung from the rafters. Pottery lined the shelves. It was the home of someone who lived carefully and deliberately. You live here alone? He asked between bites. Aitza's hands paused briefly, then resumed their rhythm. Yes, for 3 years now. What happened 3 years ago? She didn't answer for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was flat. My husband died. Jake set down his spoon. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked. You couldn't have known. She looked up at him. Eat. Finish your food. Then rest. Tomorrow, we'll see if you can walk. A week passed, and Jake began to heal. Each morning, Aitza changed his bandages and applied fresh poultices made from plants she gathered in the meadow behind her cabin. Each evening, she brewed the bitter tea that dulled his pain and helped him sleep. And slowly, day by day, his shoulder began to work again. By the 4th day, he could lift his arm without gasping. By the 6th, he could grip things without his fingers trembling. Aitza watched his progress with quiet satisfaction, never praising him, but nodding slightly when he accomplished something new. Jake had never met anyone like her. She spoke little but missed nothing. Her eyes tracked every movement, every sound, every shift in the wind. She could identify a bird by its song from half a mile away. She knew which clouds meant rain and which meant nothing at all. She moved through the world with a certainty that Jake envied. And despite everything he had been taught about her people, despite all the stories and warnings and prejudices that filled the towns where he had grown up, Jake found himself trusting her completely. Let me help, he said one morning, watching her struggle to carry water buckets from the stream. Aitza raised an eyebrow. Your shoulder is not ready. I have 2 arms. One works fine. He took the bucket from her hand before she could protest. Show me where. She studied him for a moment, then nodded toward the cabin. The barrel by the door, for washing and cooking. Jake carried the bucket, moving carefully to avoid jarring his injured shoulder. It felt good to be useful. For days he had done nothing but lie on the sleeping mat, watching Aitza work while guilt gnawed at his chest. She had saved his life and asked nothing in return. The least he could do was carry water. When he returned for the second bucket, Aitza had already lifted it. I said I would help, Jake protested. And you did. 1 bucket. Don't push yourself. You're stubborn. I'm practical. There's a difference. Jake laughed. It surprised him, the sound of his own laughter. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed. Months, maybe. Years. Aitza looked at him strangely. What's funny? Nothing. Everything. He shook his head. You remind me of my mother. She never let me win an argument either. Something flickered across Aitza's face, almost a smile. Your mother sounds like a woman I would have liked. They walked back to the cabin together, and Jake realized this was the first time they had walked side by side. Always before, he had been lying down while she worked around him. Now they were equals, moving through the morning light like 2 people who belonged in the same space. The thought warmed him more than the sun. Over the next few days, Jake found more ways to help. He chopped firewood with his good arm, working slowly but steadily until a neat pile grew beside the cabin door. He repaired a broken hinge that had been bothering Aitza for months. He helped her tend the small garden where she grew vegetables and medicinal plants. And as they worked, they talked. Aitza told him about her childhood, about growing up in a village that no longer existed. Her people had been forced onto reservation land when she was young. Many had died during the journey. Those who survived faced hunger and sickness, and the slow erosion of everything they had known. My grandmother taught me the healing ways, Aita said one afternoon, pulling weeds from between the rows of herbs. She said the plants would always be here, even when everything else was gone. She was right. Is that why you live out here? Away from everyone? I live here because this is where I belong. Aita sat back on her heels, looking out at the mountains that surrounded them. The reservation was not home. It was a cage with invisible bars. Here, I am free. Aren't you lonely? She considered the question. Sometimes. But loneliness is better than belonging somewhere that doesn't want you. Jake understood that more than he could say. He had felt like an outsider his entire life. Too honest for the card tables. Too quiet for the cattle drives. Too thoughtful for the men who measured worth in bullets and bravado. He had drifted from place to place, never quite fitting, never quite belonging. Until now. Here, in this small cabin with this remarkable woman, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. He felt peace. But peace, as he knew too well, never lasted. On the 8th morning, Aita shook him awake before dawn. Her face was serious in the gray light. Riders coming, 3 of them, from the direction of town. Jake was on his feet instantly, ignoring the twinge in his shoulder. How far? 10 minutes, maybe less. Aita handed him his shirt, now clean and mended. They've been searching for someone. I've seen their dust trails for 2 days, moving through the canyons. Jake's stomach dropped. He knew who they were looking for. He knew why. I should go, he said quickly. If they find me here, they'll cause trouble for you. Where will you go? You're not fully healed. You don't have a horse. I'll figure something out. I always do. Aita grabbed his arm, stopping him. Wait. Tell me why they're hunting you. Tell me the truth. Jake met her eyes. He owed her that much. He owed her everything. 2 weeks ago, in Silver Junction, a man named Marcus Webb accused me of taking money from his safe. $300. I didn't do it, but Webb is powerful. His family owns half the town. His word against mine isn't a fair fight. Did you take the money? No. I was working in his stables, nothing more. But someone took it, and I was the easiest one to blame. A drifter with no family, no connections, no one to speak for him. Bitterness crept into his voice. Story of my life. Aita studied his face for a long moment. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it. There's a root cellar beneath the floor, she said. Under the sleeping mat. Get in, stay quiet. Don't come out until I tell you. Aita, I can't let you risk yourself for me. You stood up for me when you had nothing to gain. Now let me do the same. She pushed him toward the sleeping mat. Go. Now. They're almost here. Jake wanted to argue, but there was no time. He could already hear hoofbeats in the distance, growing louder. He pulled back the mat, found the wooden trapdoor, and lowered himself into the darkness below. The last thing he saw before Aita closed the door was her face, calm and determined. Then there was only darkness and the sound of horses stopping outside the cabin. Jake pressed himself against the cold dirt wall of the root cellar, barely breathing. Above him, he heard everything. The creak of the cabin door opening, heavy boots on wooden floorboards, and voices. Rough, impatient voices that made his fists clench in the darkness. Morning, ma'am. Sorry to disturb you so early. The voice was polite, but Jake knew that kind of politeness. It was the politeness of men who expected to get what they wanted and would turn ugly if they didn't. Can I help you? Aita's voice was calm, unhurried, as if 3 armed men showing up at dawn was perfectly ordinary. We're looking for a man, tall, brown hair, probably injured. He's wanted for theft in Silver Junction. You seen anyone like that? I see very few people out here. That's why I live out here. A pause. Jake imagined the men looking around the cabin, their eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. Mind if we take a look around? Yes, I do mind. Another pause. Longer this time. Ma'am, we're authorized by Marcus Webb himself to search any property in the territory. You don't want to obstruct justice. This is my home, my property. Your authority means nothing here. Jake closed his eyes. She was protecting him, risking herself. And there was nothing he could do but crouch in the darkness like a coward, listening to every word. Now, listen here. The politeness was gone from the man's voice now. We can do this easy, or we can do this hard. Your choice. But we're going to search this cabin one way or another. Then you'll have to explain to the people of Dusty Creek why you forced your way into the home of the only healer within 50 miles. The woman who saved the sheriff's daughter from fever last winter. The woman who treated your own brother's broken leg, Mr. Patterson. Silence. Jake held his breath. How did she know the man's name? How did she know about his brother? When the man spoke again, his voice was different, uncertain.
That was you? Tommy never said it was an Apache woman who fixed him up.
Yeah. Tommy was ashamed to admit he needed help from someone like me. But his leg healed straight, didn't it? He walks without a limp because of my medicine. More silence. Jake could almost feel the tension seeping through the floorboards above him. We're just doing our job, ma'am. And I'm doing mine. Protecting my home and the people in it. A pause. There's no one here but me. I haven't seen any injured stranger. Now please leave. I have work to do. The boots shuffled. Someone muttered something Jake couldn't hear. Then, finally, footsteps moving toward the door. If you do see this man, there's a reward. $50. Just thought you should know. I'll keep that in mind. The door closed. Hoofbeats retreated into the distance. And then there was silence. Jake waited. Minutes passed. Each one felt like an hour. Finally, the trapdoor opened, and morning light poured into the cellar. They're gone, Isa said. Jake climbed out, his shoulder protesting the movement. His legs were stiff from crouching. But those were small concerns compared to what had just happened. You could have turned me in, he said. $50 is a lot of money. Money means nothing if you lose yourself to get it. Aitza replaced the trapdoor and spread the sleeping mat over it. Besides, I told you, I pay my debts. This is more than a debt. You lied to protect me. If they find out, they'll come back. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. Jake shook his head. I can't stay here. I'm putting you in danger. You're not fully healed. I'm healed enough. He grabbed his hat from the hook by the door. I'll head north. Maybe cross into the next territory. Start fresh somewhere they've never heard of Marcus Webb. Aitza stood between him and the door, her arms crossed. And your name? Will it ever be clear? Will you spend the rest of your life running from something you didn't do? The question hit him like a punch to the chest. Because she was right. Running meant guilt. Running meant Marcus Webb won. Running meant spending the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, never settling anywhere, never building anything. What choice do I have? There's always a choice. Aitza moved closer, her dark eyes intense. Tommy Patterson. He was working in Webb's house the night the money disappeared. I treated him for months after his accident. He talks when he's in pain, tells stories, secrets. Jake's heart began to beat faster. What kind of secrets? He mentioned once that Webb's own son had debts. He owed money to dangerous men, the kind of debts that could ruin a family's reputation. You think the son took the money? I think it's worth finding out. Jake stared at her. A week ago, he had stumbled into her cabin half dead. Now she was offering him something more valuable than medicine or shelter. She was offering him hope.
Why are you helping me? He asked quietly. The real reason.
Aitza was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. Because you looked at me like I was a person. Not an Apache, not a healer, not a problem to be solved, or a savage to be feared. Just a person. She looked away. Do you know how rare that is? Jake stepped closer, close enough to see the firelight dancing in her eyes, close enough to count the silver threads woven into her braid. Stay, she said. One more day. Rest. Let me send word to Tommy. Maybe he'll talk to me again. Maybe we can find the truth. Every instinct told Jake to run. He had survived this long by trusting no one, by keeping moving, by never letting himself care about anyone or anything. But looking at Aitza, he realized something had changed. He cared. Despite everything, he cared. One more day, he agreed. That night, they sat by the fire in comfortable silence. Aitza worked on her herbs while Jake cleaned his boots. Neither of them spoke about what would happen tomorrow or the day after.
But when their eyes met across the flickering flames, something passed between them. An understanding, a promise, something neither of them was ready to name.
Outside, the wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the scent of rain.
Another storm was coming. But this time, Jake wasn't afraid.
Tommy Patterson arrived at the cabin 3 days later.
Aitza had sent word through a trader who passed through the territory each week. The message was simple. The healer needed to see Tommy about his leg. Nothing more. Nothing that would raise suspicion.
Jake watched from the window as the young man rode up on a gray mare. Tommy was younger than he expected, maybe 20 years old, with a nervous way of looking around like he expected trouble from every shadow. Stay out of sight, Aitza said. Let me talk to him first.
Jake nodded and moved to the back of the cabin, positioning himself where he could hear, but not be seen. His shoulder was nearly healed now, but his heart pounded like he had just run a mile.
Everything depended on this conversation. Aitza opened the door before Tommy could knock. Thank you for coming. Your message said something was wrong with my leg. Tommy's voice was confused. It feels fine. Better than ever, actually. I lied. Forgive me. I needed to speak with you about something else. Aitza stepped aside. Please, come in. Tommy hesitated, then entered the cabin. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the herbs, the fire, the simple furnishings. When his gaze swept past Jake's hiding spot, Jake held his breath. But Tommy noticed nothing. What's this about? Tommy asked, sitting in the chair Ika offered. Marcus Webb. The night $300 disappeared from his safe. Tommy's face went pale. His hands gripped the arms of the chair. I don't know anything about that. I think you do. Aitza sat across from him, her voice gentle but firm. I think you know exactly what happened, and I think it's been eating at you ever since. Look, I can't talk about this. Webb is powerful. If he found out I said anything, he'd destroy my family. My mother, my sisters. They depend on me. An innocent man is being hunted for a crime he didn't commit. He could be captured. He could spend years in prison. Does that mean nothing to you? Tommy's jaw tightened. He stared at the floor, his internal struggle visible on his young face. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. It was the son, William Webb. I saw him that night. Jake's heart stopped. I was working late in the stables, Tommy continued, the words spilling out like water from a broken dam. I'd forgotten my jacket, so I went back to get it. That's when I saw William coming out of his father's study. He had something in his hands, a bag. He looked scared, guilty. He saw me and told me if I ever said anything, he'd make sure my whole family was thrown off our land. So you stayed silent? What was I supposed to do? Tommy's voice cracked. William Webb can say anything and people believe him. I'm nobody, just a stable hand. My word against his is no contest. Jake stepped out from his hiding place. Tommy jumped to his feet, his face a mask of terror. You're the one they're looking for. I am. Jake kept his voice calm. And I'm innocent. You just admitted you know that. Tommy backed toward the door. I can't help you. I'm sorry. I truly am, but I can't. Yes, you can. Jake stepped closer, not threatening, just earnest. I'm not asking you to face Webb alone. I'm asking you to tell the truth. Together, we can make people listen. The sheriff in Dusty Creek, he's a fair man, isn't he? Sheriff Monroe. Tommy hesitated. He's always treated folks decent. Even when Webb pressured him, he stood his ground a few times. Then let's go to him. Both of us. You tell him what you saw. I'll turn myself in voluntarily. We'll let him investigate properly. And if William denies everything? Itza spoke up. Then we find other evidence. There's always evidence. William owes money to dangerous people, doesn't he? Someone knows where that money went. Someone always knows. Tommy looked between them, fear and hope warring on his face. Jake recognized that expression. It was the look of someone who had been carrying a weight too heavy for too long and was finally considering setting it down. My mother always said the truth sets you free, Tommy said quietly. I just never had the courage to believe her. You have it now, Itza said. You just have to use it. Tommy closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something had changed. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something stronger. Resolution. All right, he said. I'll do it. I'll tell Sheriff Monroe everything. The ride to Dusty Creek took half a day. Jake rode Tommy's mare, while Tommy shared a horse with Itza. They didn't speak much during the journey. There was nothing left to say. Everything depended on what happened next. Sheriff Monroe listened to Tommy's confession with a face like stone. He asked questions, examined details, sent deputies to investigate William Webb's finances and associates. By sunset, the truth was unraveling faster than anyone expected. William Webb had indeed stolen from his father. He owed money to dangerous men in Silver Junction. He had taken the $300 to pay part of his debt and blamed the convenient stranger who had no one to defend him. Marcus Webb, confronted with the evidence, broke down. His own son, his own blood. The shame was written across his face as he publicly apologized to Jake in front of the whole town. Jake was a free man, but freedom felt different than he had imagined. Standing in the dusty street of Dusty Creek, watching the townspeople whisper and stare, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt empty, lost. What will you do now? Itza asked. She had stayed by his side through everything. Jake looked at her. This woman who had saved his life, who had believed in him, who had fought for him when she had no reason to. I don't know, he admitted. I could go anywhere, start over. You could. But nowhere feels like home. Itza smiled, that rare, quiet smile that transformed her whole face. Maybe home isn't a place. Maybe it's a person. Jake's heart swelled. Words he had never spoken before rose in his throat, demanding to be released. Come with me, he said. Or let me stay with you. I don't care which. I just know that these past weeks with you have been the closest thing to home I've felt since my mother died. Itza reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, strong, certain. Then come home, Jake Thornton. Come home. They returned to the cabin in the canyon. In the years that followed, people would tell stories about the Apache healer and the cowboy who loved her. Some said it was impossible, a white man and an Apache woman building a life together. But those who knew them saw the truth. They worked the land side by side. They healed the sick together, combining Aicha's plant medicine with Jake's steady hands. They built something rare and precious in a world that often seemed determined to tear people apart. And every night, as they sat by the fire watching the stars appear over the mountains, Jake remembered the storm that had changed everything. He had entered the wrong house that night, but he had found exactly where he belonged,